The moment my wife's swollen ankles brushed the hardwood floor with gentle, steady footsteps, the world seemed to tilt beneath our feet, as if gravity itself recoiled at her presence. The soft thud of her booties was the only sound in our sunlit hallway until HOA Karen stormed out of her perfectly manicured yard, her face twisted in righteous fury. Fingers trembling around her smartphone, she barked into the camera. "I'm calling 911 because that pregnant woman's footsteps sound viciously threatening to my peace and quiet." The absurdity reverberated through the neighborhood like a cruel joke, yet the same instant a uniformed officer appeared, mindlessly trained to respond to every call. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and whispered to my wife to stay calm even as her eyes widened with disbelief at the absurd claim. When Officer Ramirez knocked on our door, I opened it to stand shoulder to shoulder with my trembling wife, her fingertips brushing my hand for reassurance. HOA Karen hovered in the background, clutching her phone as if it were evidence of a crime. "Sir," the officer said, voice flat and duty-bound, "your neighbor reports aggressive footsteps." I forced a calm smile. "Officer," she called because she heard my wife walking to the nursery. "She's almost 8 months along. Her footsteps are as aggressive as a butterfly landing on glass." The logic hit like a sledgehammer to a glass wall. The officer's brow furrowed. He exchanged a glance with his partner before apologizing and retreating to his patrol car. I closed the door, my wife collapsing into my arms as adrenaline drained from her limbs. In the days that followed, I discovered HOA Karen had built a pattern of petty complaints, documenting every minor sound as though she chronicled war crimes. Leaf blower drones at dawn, children's laughter, the dog's excited growl all catalogued in her HOA complaint binder. Fueled by righteous indignation, I scavenged her social media for patterns and found a hidden past. An exiled former PTA president who had been removed for bullying before the neighborhood's color-coded flags flew over every mailbox. With this knowledge, I enlisted our elderly next-door neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, a spry retiree who'd witnessed Karen's reign of terror. Over coffee, Mrs. Delgado confirmed that Karen once fined a widowed grandmother for planting daisies outside her own fence line. The fire in my chest ignited into a plan of truth was the weapon. We'd arm ourselves thoroughly. On the morning of our planned confrontation, I delivered copies of Karen's own posts, photos of her obsession, and affidavits from 3 neighbors to the HOA board. I watched their faces shift from forced politeness to horror as they realized they'd been enabling a tyrant. Meanwhile, I arranged for a local news crew to stop by to cover community peace initiatives. When the cameras rolled, I stood on our porch with my wife in her flowing maternity dress flanked by our neighbors holding signs that read, "Protect families, not noise." Karen stormed out, fury contorting her face, ready to accuse us of staging propaganda. But as the reporter asked her to explain which rule prohibits gentle footsteps, her voice cracked under the weight of her own absurdity. Midway through the interview, a twist surfaced. The cameraman recognized Karen from a viral video where she terrorized hotel staff over a wrongly billed minibar charge. He casually mentioned it on air. And the footage flashed behind us, Karen screaming at a front desk clerk until management intervened. At that moment, the entitled veneer cracked, revealing a personality built on fear and control. Karen's cheeks flushed red. She fumbled for words and stormed off camera, leaving only her tattered credibility in view. The neighborhood watched live as authority evaporated, leaving behind the darker truth of a bully hiding behind officialdom. By sunset, Karen's complaints box lay empty at the HOA office, her position stripped of power, her privileges revoked. A formal apology to my wife and our unborn child was posted to every household, her previous edicts nullified by the board. The neighborhood breathed collectively, the tension dissolving like frost under morning sun. My wife smiled, tears of relief shining in her eyes, and placed her hand on her belly, as if to cradle the peace we had won. As dawn broke the next day, life returned to its gentle rhythm, the soft patting of baby booties, birdsong, and laughter drifting across fences. I stood on our porch, gazing at the horizon, knowing that justice had been served not with violence, but with unyielding truth and community solidarity. If you think my actions were justified or believe HOA Karen had a right to protect her peace, share your thoughts and let's discuss who really disturbed who's quiet. From the moment the neighborhood exhaled in relief, life began to pulse with new energy. My wife and I rose each morning to the gentle chorus of songbirds, our windows thrown open to welcome a breeze that carried laughter rather than tension. Yet beneath each smile and casual wave, I sensed the subtle shifts of a community reclaiming its voice. Children played in the yard with abandon, their sneakers scuffing the grass like a percussion section rehearsing freedom. Gardeners tended to roses and begonias without fear that their pruning shears might earn a late-night complaint. And as my wife's belly blossomed, so did the sense of hope that had taken root on our block. Every visit from Mrs. Delgado felt like a ceremony of solidarity, her stories of raising 5 children echoing the promise of new life. She would pat my arm and whisper that this baby would arrive into a neighborhood more united than any she'd known in her 80 years. With each passing week, our home transformed into a sanctuary of expectation. Friends offered to paint the nursery in soft lavender and cream, neighbors delivered casseroles that smelled of casseroles and kindness, and the local bakery sent loaves adorned with tiny sugar footprints. Each gesture reminded us that for every HOA Karen, a dozen hearts beat with compassion. At night, I would sit beside my wife on the porch, her feet propped on a cushion, sunlight fading into the warm glow of our porch lamp. I watched her hand trace circles on her abdomen, feeling the faint flutter of our child moving inside. In those moments, words felt too clumsy to express the gratitude swelling in my chest. So I simply held her hand and let silence speak. Then came the twist that no one anticipated. While reviewing footage from the neighborhood watch camera installed months earlier but rarely checked, I noticed a car parked outside our home late one evening, headlights illuminating our darkened windows. The driver was none other than HOA Karen, her silhouette hunched over her phone screen as she filmed our house under cover of darkness. My blood ran cold imagining what story she intended to spin next. Yet instead of reacting with anger, I plotted a different response. Early the next morning, I invited the board president to join me for coffee at the community center under the pretext of discussing neighborhood safety measures ahead of the baby's arrival. As she stirred sugar into her latte, I casually mentioned the camera footage of someone trespassing on our property at 2 a.m. Her face paled so visibly that the barista paused mid-foam. "I must have the wrong person," she stammered, but her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting an entourage of officers to burst through. I leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Of course you're innocent. That's why I wanted to show you the time-stamped file." Pulling out my tablet, I cued the video. The entire cafe fell silent as neighbors recognized the figure on screen. A murmur rose as they realized the woman they defended under the guise of rule following had been sneaking around in the dark. In that instant, Karen's last shred of authority evaporated. She fled, latte abandoned on the table, leaving the board president and neighbors to discuss new bylaws that would ensure transparency and compassion in every decision. Word traveled fast, and within days the city council received an official petition signed by 80% of our block to revise HOA guidelines to protect families, expectant mothers, and any resident who dared to live with ordinary sounds and ordinary dreams. As spring turned to early summer, the day arrived when my wife's contractions began. I stood by her side in the hospital room, the bass line of her breathing steady against the chaotic beeping of monitors. Outside our window, I could see the familiar silhouette of children riding bikes past the nurse's station, a reminder that life continued beyond these sterile walls. When the moment came, time seemed to both stretch and collapse into itself. My wife's first scream was the sound of creation, raw and triumphant, and I felt tears burn behind my eyes as they guided our baby into the world. The obstetrician placed our daughter onto my wife's chest, her tiny fists curled in reflex, her skin pink and weighed with potential. In that instant, every battle, every sleepless night, every stand we took felt sanctified. The world seemed to hold its breath as our daughter let out her first cry, a pure, untamed testament to love's victory over fear. Back at home, we introduced her to the porch swing that had once cradled my wife's belly. Mrs. Delgado pressed her spectacles onto her nose and declared, "She's a fighter already, that one." And as neighbors filed by to glimpse the new light in our lives, they brought gifts of handmade quilts, knitted booties, and jars full of lemonade. Even the local news returned, this time to capture the story of how a community rallied behind a family, turning injustice into a collective triumph. HOA Karen's house remained empty that summer, the manicured hedges growing wild in her absence. Rumor spread that she had sold her property at a steep loss and moved to an HOA-less desert town, hoping to find somewhere her rules might still ring without challenge. But our block needed no fences to keep us together. Instead, we erected a small wooden sign near the community garden that simply read, "Love makes no noise." A handwritten reminder that life's rhythms, footsteps, laughter, tears are meant to be celebrated, rather than silenced. As dusk fell each evening, I tucked our daughter into her crib, the soft whir of her mobile drifting through the dark. My wife joined me at the doorway, leaning into my shoulder as we watched our sleeping child. In those quiet hours, I reflected on everything we'd endured. The absurdity of being policed for gentle steps, the courage found in sharing our truth, the unexpected alliances formed out of compassion. And I realized that the greatest power we hold is the ability to stand up not with bitterness, but with unwavering commitment to justice and humanity. If you believe our story shows that even the smallest voice can shatter the loudest injustice, or if you think we were too harsh, share your perspective. After all, real change begins when we dare to listen, to challenge, and to choose empathy over entitlement.